Bob's Burgers, Disney, Pikmin, theme parks. Long ago, the four main topics lived together in harmony, but everything changed when the theme park videos flopped. Only the Cat in the Hat, a deadly being of immense power, could stop them. But when the channel needed him most, these videos also bombed. Years later, we discovered the Cat in the Hat's one successor, a nerd called the Topus. And while his upload schedule is awful, I believe he can save the channel.
Alright, everyone here? Good, great. Hey everyone, I'm what we call in the business a hefty fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Like, if we're judging my favorite fictional universes, it's for sure in like the top 5, right along with Star Wars, Pikmin, Over the Garden Wall, and Adventure Time. It's just one of my favorite worlds ever created by peoples. It's very good. And the show itself is a genuine masterpiece with maybe some of the best character writing I've ever seen in a series. Our two main characters, Aang and Zuko, both go through such fantastic character journeys, Zuko specifically. The other characters are all very endearing and likable. The villains are terrifying, and Uncle Iroh is pretty much tied with Wirt and Simon Petrikov as my favorite fictional character. Hey, where do y'all think Louis Pikmin would rank in my top 10 characters? Like, I know he'd be on there, but where would he be? Anyway, with Avatar: The Last Airbender being a near flawless masterpiece, and The Legend of Korra being fantastic as well, and all the Avatar Studios projects sounding really promising, I was pretty sure that Avatar as a brand would be pretty much perfect. Sure, there was the blemish with the legitimately atrocious live-action M. Night movie, but like, surely they wouldn't try that again, right? So yeah, they announced it, and after a while of knowing absolutely nothing, we got our first scrap of news about the Netflix Avatar live-action remake series. That news? The original creators left the series. Oops! That was immediately worrying. And what followed was a rumor that spread like wildfire that apparently the creators left the show because it was changing the target demographic to exclusively adults, aging up the characters to include more violence and sexual themes, and that wasn't true.
You really think someone would do that? Just go on the internet and tell lies?
Enter now. Netflix releases their live-action reboot of Avatar. The first season adapted from Book 1 Water, of course, and watching it was an experience. I actually documented my concerns with the series in a somewhat rushed video shortly before its release, and as such, I was more than ready for the worst possible outcome. I was ready for something on par with the movie, just visually nicer. And I got something admittedly much better than the movie. Like, I don't want to see anyone compare this to that thing. This is genuinely great in comparison, which is not saying much at all, but it is miles better in every way, and I promise you that. Having said, yeah, we have a lot to talk about, because this show is a mess, to say the least. We have 8 episodes to go over, so we'll just go in order. In advance, by the way, just want to make this clear, it is fine to love this show, it is fine to hate this show. All opinions are welcome. I'd love to stir a conversation in the comments. Obviously, also, this is intended for those familiar with the original series. There will be massive spoilers ahead for probably the entirety of The Last Airbender. You should be safe if you haven't seen Korra yet. Oh yeah, I'll be using a lot of footage from the original series for copyright reasons, and it's just a lot easier to access. I'll try my best to sprinkle in live-action footage when I can, though. Without further ado, let's dive into the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender Netflix edition, starting with Episode 1, titled Aang, is the first episode. See, that's why it's called Episode 1. We're going to talk about literally everything I took note of. So, first off, this entire opening sequence is definitely worth discussion. It is vastly different to the original series. Where the original series starts with Katara and Sokka finding Aang in the iceberg, this show starts with the events prior to him being frozen there, the genocide of the airbenders and whatnot. I don't like it as much. I do have some positives right away, though. We're gonna get the positive stuff out of the way first. I like seeing Sozin immediately. It's a cool addition. It's a bit corny, but the fact he and Ozai could just melt people is kind of sick. Anyway, I like that we also get to see the actual plan Sozin had to attack the air nomads. It's neat seeing how that whole thing actually happened. This whole portion of the opening is pretty decent. Sozin is scary, the stakes are set as high, I'm into it. So then we actually see the air nomads and okay. Look, Gyatso and Aang's friendship is such a genuinely sweet thing in the original series. And before we get the reveal of Gyatso's violent death, we see a lot of flashbacks of them bonding. This does so much to get you attached to these two out of the gate. The scene where Gyatso cheats at the board game, or when they drop the pastries on the elders, seeing these two goof off and be friends. It's nice, and it gets you attached to their unique relationship. So we don't get any of that here. It sucks too, because I really love Gyatso here. His casting is really good, and he has a line I love, where when Aang questions if they're even friends, he just responds with, "You are my friend." That's so sweet, but I only feel that way because I'm already attached to Aang and Gyatso as characters because I watched the original series. This is a running problem. We needed some sort of bonding scene before this part to serve these versions of the characters, like a real scene of the two goofing off and being friends. I do like the addition of the Airbenders having a comet festival, just more cultural details like that are neat. Anyway, back to complaining for a bit. The way the elders know Aang as the Avatar is a lot less creative, which is funny because they literally could have just copied it from the original. In the original, the elders know Aang is the Avatar because when he was a baby, he chose 4 correct Avatar artifacts instead of regular toys, which is neat and adds to Airbender culture in a fun way. In this, they know Aang is the Avatar because he's just wicked smart at airbending. That's a lot more boring. Anyway, Gyatso tells Aang he's the aviator, and Aang just kind of monologues to the air, and again, he's telling us things they could be showing. I'm a kid who just likes to play games and have fun. Show us him playing games and having fun.
You can't just have your characters announce how they feel. That makes me feel angry!
Plus, this dialogue only exists to justify a radical shift in Aang's character that this show pulls, but we'll discuss that when we get to Aang's character a little later. Anyway, so then Aang runs away, just like in the original. Oh, sorry, run away would imply that he ran away, because nope, he didn't try to run away. That would make him too childish and immature and seem like he has flaws, and we can't let our 12-year-old who just learned he's all-powerful react too much to that news. So instead he kind of just flies up with Appa to get his mind off things, and then storms and he falls into the water. Is he stupid? Sorry, in the original, he was running away with no intention of going back. He still flew into a storm, but I feel it's a little more understandable to try and push through it. Here, I mean, it's clearly about to storm. Why did he do that? Again, is he stupid? Anyway, he falls into the water and balls. Cool, yay. Back at the air temple, we see Sozin lead the attack and genocide everyone. There's some neat fighting here, some creative stuff. I like when this one airbender does a tornado and then they light it on fire. Not sure if it's realistic, but it was inventive. I really like that Gyatso makes his final stand protecting a bunch of kids, very in character. Gyatso in general is just really well written and well portrayed. I just feel like they forgot to include a lot of the parts that made him, endearing, but anyway. I just feel like the reason this opening fails is that it shouldn't have been the opening. The stuff with Aang is infinitely worse than it was in the original, but all the other problems with this opening could be solved if they just had the sequence play out later on after a few flashbacks showing Aang and Gyatso bonding. You know, there was a reason they waited to reveal the whole genocide thing in the original. It was a moment that really set the show apart. It made the Fire Nation go from, oh, those are some mean guys, to, oh, the Fire Nation is an evil militaristic monster that is spreading across the entire world and will extinguish any threat to their power. Anyway, moving on, we get, I guess this show's version of the opening. We don't really see it again, but whatever, it counts. Kyoshi narrates for some reason. That's Kyoshi, right? I don't get it, but okay. So anyway, then we basically just get the original opening scene with Katara and Sokka discovering Aang. I will touch more on their characterization later. They find Aang and they bring him back to the Water Tribe, and this is where we get the most baffling decision in the entire episode. For some reason, this show felt the need to have Graham recite the opening narration of the original series, basically word for word. She also reveals to Aang that his temple was attacked, so now he just knows that, I guess, except not really, because they still do the whole beat of him reacting to it later on, so okay. So I honestly don't hate the idea of a character in-universe doing the original intro monologue, but just one question. Why was it not Katara? She narrates the original intro, so it would have felt a lot more natural. Gram even mentions that everyone in the village knows the story. Plus, it could serve as bonding between Katara and Aang, something this episode really lacks in comparison to the original. This whole idea just feels really poorly thought out and lazy. Anyway, so then we meet Zuko and Iroh, who we'll talk about more later on as well. Just know that I like them. They're the best part of the show, and them capturing Aang and whatnot in this episode is, you know, it's fine. It works. It's basically the same as in the original, a little less energetic. I like Iroh's little talk with Aang, even if it's just kind of foreshadowing a better exchange they have later on. Yeah. Moving along to the end of the episode, we go to the Southern Air Temple, we see the remnants of the massacre, we get the Avatar State panic attack, and it's very similar to the original. I honestly don't think Katara talking him out of it was earned at this point in the original. Even there, it doesn't feel like they're close enough yet. So naturally, that issue with the original is amplified here because they cut out all the bonding between Katara and Aang at the Water Tribe. The penguin sledding, the fun conversation, that's all gone, so it feels like Katara's barely a character. However, it is indeed a good scene in the original, and it's basically identical, so it's still a good scene in isolation here. But then the episode ends, and episode 2 opens with them finding Momo. I need to rant about this before I properly start my episode 2 segment. I'm sorry. In the original Southern Air Temple episode, right, it ends with them finding Momo, because it's meant to immediately juxtapose the horror we just saw. We saw the remains of a truly gruesome genocide. And Aang adopting Momo is meant to be Aang having like a permanent connection with his lost heritage and culture, and you know, it's like a reminder. Okay, so that rolls the same here, but it doesn't work nearly as well as an opening to the next episode as it would as an ending, especially because, spoiler alert, Momo's not relevant to episode 2 at all, or relevant at all until the season finale. This choice isn't bad, but like it bugs me because the pacing is so weird. Let's move on to episode 2. Episode 2 is titled Warriors. It's not very good. This episode adapts the Kyoshi Warrior episode in the original series, and okay, let's talk about Aang and his character shift. So Aang's character has had a drastic change for the worse. Obviously, he has a really big heart, he wants to do the right thing, but he still has an immature side. There's this great episode where he's scared of losing Sokka and Katara as friends, so he hides a note from their dad because he doesn't want them to leave. It says a lot about his character, and of course there's the various stops he wants to make on their journey to the North Pole. Well, Netflix took a look at that character and threw him out the window because he's not here. He's gone. They killed him. So in this show, Aang just acts super mature for his age, and like, I see the vision, right? Aang is growing up because he was thrust into this super war-torn world and his culture is dead. I get the thought process, but I just feel like it misses a lot of the point and charm of Aang's character. What made him such a fun contrast to the depressing state of the world in spite of his trauma. Not to mention the way they get him extra determined to stay on task is so stupid. Basically, Aang goes to Kyoshi Island to talk to the spirit of Kyoshi, and she gives him a flash forward to the season finale showing him visions of the North Pole under siege. This acts as the primary motivator for our protagonist throughout the season. This decision really bothers me because it replaces the need to learn waterbending. Aang learning waterbending is gone. It's like it is not brought up at all, and he doesn't waterbend throughout the entire. He doesn't learn how to waterbend. Why did they do it like this? I think another Aang thing that really bugs me is the fact that despite him being super mature and competent in this show, he still has characters call him out for being immature and childish, but like, no, he's not. That idea could be neat if you had it the same way he was in the original, but he isn't. He's glued to his mission to defeat Ozai and save the world, and only diverts from that path when people are in genuine peril. It's such a weird mischaracterization. But what really kills me about this, though, the worst part of all of this is that Aang's casting is perfect. This kid is so good, but he's just playing a character who is written specifically to be a hollow shell of what he's supposed to be. I guarantee if this kid was given the scripts of the original series, he would have killed it. Oh yeah, Kyoshi stuff. It's fine, I guess. The flash forward is stupid, but it's cool demonstrating some avatar powers this early on. I think she's written fine. I don't know, I'm not really passionate about her character. It seems in line with her scenes in the original. I've heard her books do all the heavy lifting in terms of her character, so I might check those out, who knows. Anyway, let's move on to the worst part of this episode. Yep, that's right. That's right. We have yet to talk about the really bad stuff. I want to get this rant out of the way before I start complimenting this episode on the good stuff, because there is good stuff, but good lord, these showrunners, they completely missed the point of Sokka's plotline on Kyoshi Island, as well as Sokka's entire character. Let's start with Sokka as a character before moving on to the specifics. So yes, Sokka's sexism is completely absent from this show, and while that is a misunderstanding on some level, it wouldn't be an atrocious change as long as you emphasize the other flaws or replace that with something else. But no, Sokka's just kind of perfect, and most episodes involve some character complimenting him for how cool he is, or showing him in a super sympathetic light, or having like constant positive reinforcement where he's the one who's like, oh, I'm terrible, and then someone else is like, no, Sokka, you're not terrible, you're really good. Okay, so let's compare that to the original series, shall we? Namely season 1. That's what we're adapting here after all. Sokka was humbled in most episodes. He got some major wins, Jet comes to mind, but the point was always to teach him lessons to make him grow. The first lesson was nipping his sexism, and Kyoshi Island was a vehicle that they used to do that. The other big thing with Sokka's character in the original is that he's funny. Like, genuinely. He has a super manic energy paired with some super expressive voice acting and character animation, and it made for such a memorable comedic character. There's a reason people love It'll Quench Ya! This show still has Sokka as the main comedic relief, but the main difference is that they forgot the funny. This could be blamed on the writing, but I'm gonna be real, I think it's the actor. This guy is not Sokka. He cannot sell any jokes. He came close to making me chuckle like twice across the 4 hours of this show that exist. He doesn't lack enthusiasm, he just doesn't fit the character. Also, wow, that is in fact 2 live-action Avatar adaptations that turn the Native American-inspired water tribe into people with very light skin. Cool, awesome. Apparently the actor lied about his race. This rabbit hole sure does keep going, doesn't it? Okay, so Sokka and Suki, one of my favorite couples in the original series. They're one of my favorites because of how realistically paced they felt. Sokka was clearly into her on Kyoshi Island, but Suki was not. She gave him a pity kiss at the end to motivate him, but there wasn't really romantic interest until they reconnected later. And then they become ludicrously adorable once she joins the main character squad. So anyway, in this series, Suki instantly falls in love with Sokka. The two spend the entire episode just having the hots for each other. Wrong! I'm sorry. That kind of destroys everything that made this part of their relationship work in the first place. It's abundantly obvious they'll get together, unlike the original where Sokka grew from meeting Suki. Here, there's no character development outside of the new viewers going, oh, I guess this is Sokka's love interest. Feels like they're speedrunning just so they could be like, hey, fans of the original, Sokka and Suki, they get together, you like them, they're cute together, wow. And the fact this ends with Sokka being treated as the hero who showed Suki the magic of the world is just remarkably disingenuous. Sharp contrast to him being some annoying dude who walked in that she taught a lesson, and then they later reconnect. Suki being some sheltered dreamer is such a whack mischaracterization. Like, it sucks. I'm like, just gonna be frank, it's awful. Moving on from that, let's get into a positive. It's something I started to notice in this episode, but applies to the whole show. The CGI is pretty good. The creatures all look fantastic. I know there's been a ton of controversy on how the bending looks, but honestly, I think this is literally the best it can possibly look while still keeping it grounded. The water specifically looks really nice. Fire's good too, but it's mostly that water that is just super satisfying. The other elements are fine. I don't know, the CGI never took me out of things, which is a sharp contrast to the M. Night movie. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that real quick. It's good. Special effects are good. Right, let's move on to my biggest compliment for this episode, as well as the entire show, and that is that Zuko and Iroh are still the absolute best characters and part of the entire show, as I mentioned earlier. There's still a few iffy writing things with Iroh specifically, which is really unfortunate because he's my favorite character, but overall, I'm still pretty happy with this adaptation of him, and Zuko is basically perfect. Both of them are cast perfectly as well. Zuko's new actor kills it. He has a very different energy to Dante Bosco in the original, but like, he's still giving off the same disgraced, traumatized prince vibe very well in his own way. It feels like a different take on Zuko that still understands why he works so well. Iroh is a bit too stern, as many critics have pointed out. He definitely feels like he considers himself superior to Zuko's crew, which is a firm contrast to the Iroh that had engaged and entertained them with stories and whatnot in the original series. However, this really doesn't bug me as much as it could. He's also very well cast, which helps. That's Captain Teva from Star Wars! I have more to say about Zuko and Iroh and their storyline, but we'll save it so this doesn't become a disaster. We also meet Zhao this episode. I'll talk about him later too. There's no, he's still the main villain of the season, and they change up his story a bit. He's perfectly cast. He perfectly replicates Zhao's energy in the original series while still adding his own interpretation and new layers that make this version of the story stand on its own. He was honestly a standout actor of the show, which is funny when you consider that he didn't even know what Avatar was. He thought he was getting cast in a Ferngully remake or something. Despite that mix-up, he really gave it his all, and he pulled off a version of Zhao that I actually prefer to the original, but we'll discuss that later. Anyway, I think that covers it for episode 2, basically. Let's move right along to... Episode 3 is titled Omashu, and this is a disaster. Sorry, but it is. Who was the wise guy who thought, hey, let's combine like 3 episodes haphazardly together and see what happens? I get you only have 8 episodes, but I don't know, man. There had to be a better option than whatever this was. Maybe you should pick up shows for longer seasons or something. I don't know. Anyway, let's break down everything they squeeze into this one episode. Okay, bear with me here, and hopefully you'll understand the pain. This episode has Omashu elements fused with characters from the Northern Air Temple and the characters from Jet. And I'm sorry, this does everyone involved a disservice. Jet here is just so underdeveloped feeling. He goes through basically the same story, but now it's interrupted because we have to develop the inventor guy and his disabled son, daughter. As a result, you have all these potentially interesting characters that are just fighting for screen time. They do an okay job at combining these plot lines. Jet wants to kill the inventor guy because he's selling weapons to the Fire Nation. But we learned that so quick, so there's no sense of escalation at all. In the original Jet episode, there was build-up, and the best part was that it was Sokka's first big win of the series. He had a bad feeling about Jet, and it paid off when he figured out Jet was a terrorist who wanted to kill anyone of the Fire Nation origin, regardless of whether or not they actually allied with Ozai. This is a kid's show, apparently. But as mentioned, Sokka in this show is already treated like a perfect being who can do no wrong, so obviously this would be the time to finally utilize Katara, right? You know, Katara, like the 3rd most important character of the show who hasn't done anything so far. Her? Maybe give her a slightly different story? Nope. Sokka still finds out, despite literally not being part of the Jet plotline at all, instead of bonding with the inventor guy. Great! I feel absolutely nothing for Sokka and the inventor guy in this, man. In the original series, the two had a pretty fun dynamic and chemistry, due to both of them being kind of manic and off-kilter characters. Here, though, the inventor guy is just boring, and Sokka's been massively toned down. There's nothing here. I also feel like Huey from DuckTales was the absolute wrong choice for this character. You need someone with more energy, someone like Murray Stranger Things would have been more appropriate. Her plotline doesn't even really get resolved this episode. Same for Jet, by the way. The episode just ends with this really awkward action scene where they stop Jet's plan to assassinate King Boomy, and there's no character resolution until next episode, which is a choice. They do that a lot, huh? They did that with Momo earlier too, remember that? The part I liked was Aang bonding with the inventor guy's daughter. I don't know, it was a nice new bond, and the first time we really see Aang interact and connect to someone outside Katara and Sokka, and even then I feel like it was done better than him interacting and connecting with Katara and Sokka. It was a nice addition. It ties into the Jet story fairly naturally. I don't know, sure. Okay, so this next point is a bit of a mixed bag for me. This episode introduces us to Ozai and Azula, 2 big overarching villains. Ozai is literally the main villain of the entire series, and Azula is just under him in terms of big villainness. I was actually open to the idea of them introducing them into the story sooner, especially given Ozai is cast flawlessly. This guy is perfect as Ozai. He really sells every evil line, every subtle manipulation. He was definitely a highlight. We'll discuss both these characters in more detail later on, but for now, let's talk about the scene introducing them. Okay, so basically there's this group of rebels who want to assassinate Ozai. A lot of assassination this episode. So they trust this maid from the palace to sneak them in, but ruh-roh, it was Azula all along. Ignoring the fact it's really dumb for these rebels to trust someone who serves Ozai in close proximity, and completely believing her generic sob story. I like the idea of seeing an act of rebellion. The scene just annoys me because it really shows a huge issue with the entire show, as I alluded to earlier. So, Who is this for? Is it for new people? Is it meant to gather a new fan base, introduce new people to the franchise, or is this made for people who have already seen and loved the original series? Because, like, they say they want new fans, and then there's choices like this.
Isn't that right, Azula?
See, when Ozai reveals that the maid is Azula, they do a dramatic music cue after he says the name Azula. But if this is your first time with the series, you don't know who Azula is. Okay, let's even be generous and say you've only seen book 1 and it failed to grab you properly. Yeah, so you still don't know who Azula is. And the thing is, the dramatic music would still work fine. Just after Azula says, "Yes, father," that's the reveal. That's the "oh crap, we're in trouble" moment. Why is this show like this? Anyway, Azula's presence in this episode is decent. Again, I'll have more to say about her later. I just want to mention that Ty Lee and May have literally no reason to be in this show. They serve no point besides allowing, again, fans of the original series to say, "Hey, I know who those guys are." Now let's move on and finally discuss Zuko and Iroh this episode. I like just about everything with them just fine. I think it was a good idea to have Zuko and Zhao temporarily work together. That's a unique dynamic, and it was pretty interesting, especially seeing how much Zuko resented it the whole time. The battle between Zuko and Aang at the end of the episode was definitely the highlight. I love Iroh sacrificing himself to let Zuko escape. That's good stuff. And all this leads into the single best wink to the original series. For those who are uncultured, there's a running gag in the original series where the most iconic character in the series, the Cabbage Man, this poor old man who's just trying to sell cabbages, and everywhere he ends up, Aang Company arrive and destroy his cabbage cart. And then he says his sick and ominous catchphrase, "My cabbages." This whole episode, I was praying the Cabbage Man would appear. And then he did, and let me say, it did not disappoint. They so knew what they were doing. Not only is it the original actor who did the voice for the Cabbage Man in the OG series, but they hold on this. They shoot it super dramatically, and the line delivery is flawless.
My cabbages!
Definitely my favorite moment in the whole show. Genuinely hilarious. I was so happy. Okay, let's finally talk about Katara. She has like an okay character arc this episode. Like it meets the basic requirements for a journey for a character to go on. I'm even struggling to remember what happened. That's sort of the big issue with Katara. She's just kind of there. Katara was a very present, important character throughout the original series. Season 1 was not an exception either. It's book 1 water. She's the waterbender. But she is just really underwritten here. She has nothing to do here, and it hurts extra because, like, I don't feel any sort of bond between her and Aang. It seems like they're probably just cutting the ship out entirely, which frankly I'm okay with. Katang is fine, kind of overhated within the fandom, and I like the idea of the two eventually falling in love. I just don't think it works too well as a childhood romance thing. But they didn't replace that with anything. Episode 4 gets kind of close in giving her something, and you'll see that shortly, but the show just seems content just constantly bringing up or flashing back to her tragic backstory, and pretending that alone gives her depth when no, it doesn't. As for her casting, I see the potential. The actress feels a little uncomfortable in the role, if I'm being honest, but I think with time she'll grow into like a more comfortable, improved Katara. But yeah, somewhat stiff acting doesn't help with her just feeling unmemorable. And I must stress, I feel bad for saying that. It's not a bad performance by any means, just a bit held back. It could be the script's fault for completely cutting her zanier aspects and snark. Dare I say, she just feels like the girl and not a character. And that really sucks, and is a sharp contrast to her probably being my favorite of the main trio in the original series. I don't know, Sokka's also pretty great. Oh, and later Toph joins the team, and why aren't I just watching the original at this point? Anyway, it's a bad episode. Hopefully the next one's better. It's not.
I'm not really feeling like myself today.
Episode 4 is titled Into the Dark. Cool, we got rid of the single name word scheme. It seems to be unanimously agreed upon the worst episode of the entire show. But I don't know, I kind of feel like 3 and 5 are worse. This one has some really terrible stuff, but also some stuff I like, and some stuff I'm mixed on. Let's just jump in here. So right off the bat, it's really stupid that they just resolve the scientist guy and Jet stories with one scene in this episode, and then we just we just forget about them. I don't know, it's... What? Anyway, let's talk about King Boomy! Right off the bat, perfect casting! He looks and sounds the part, and I was very entertained by his performance. Dare I say, I like his performance here more than I did the original. See, the dirty little secret about Avatar Season 1 is that the crew was definitely figuring out what they themselves wanted to do with the show in the first half of Book 1. And the King Boomy episode was definitely one of those slightly rough steps, in my opinion. It's a fun little episode, but it feels notably more juvenile than most of the series, and Boomy himself was just never a character I was particularly fond of. But I cannot stress enough how much the live-action series assassinates the idea behind his character. He was once this ancient, insane genius with a lot of optimism and hope, and he's now a cynical, senile old man who's also an idiot. They are just not the same character. In the original series, Boomy was playing an elaborate game with Aang, trying to help him figure out his true identity, while also motivating and giving Aang hope. In this series, Boomy's goal is literally to beat Aang down and make him feel regret for the things that aren't even his fault, and it's frustrating, because there are parts of this I do like. I like the idea of, since Boomy is ancient, he's lived the entire life through the war. That's a compelling idea, and it should have been used to make his optimism more impressive, and not as an excuse to remove it altogether. Also, the fight between him and Aang was one of the weaker action scenes, mostly because they are trying really hard to mimic the super expressive animation, and it fails spectacularly. So what are Katara and Sokka up to? Well, okay, so look, one of my favorite episodes from the entire show is The Cave of Two Lovers. I think it's the best Katang shipping episode, as well as just being a really, really funny one. I love those hippies, I love their song. The episode is in season 2, though. So imagine my terror when all of a sudden, hey look, secret tunnel, baby! So this is just kind of here now, and no lie, I kind of hate it. Like, I get it. It's one of the only filler episodes in Season 2, which generally has way more plot than Season 1. So you might not have time to do it in Season 2. But meanwhile, Season 1 has all sorts of episodes you can cut out. So why not do this fan-favorite episode here, where you can do it justice instead? I totally get that, but they don't do it justice. The hippies are still pretty delightful, just a lot less funny, and the cave itself is so much lamer here, mostly because it's not the focus of the episode. And while I am intrigued by the idea of them using the cave to test Sokka and Katara's sibling relationship rather than Katara and Aang's implied romantic relationship, especially when you consider that the ship is probably cut out of the show entirely, forgot to mention that, okay, bye. It kind of falls flat in its face when you realize that once again the show is bending over backwards to give Sokka character building moments, and Katara is being left in the dust here. The big moment is Katara telling Sokka that he's not their dad. But again, that serves Sokka's character way more than it does Katara's. At least they sang the Secret Tunnel song, and that was pretty epic because I like the Secret Tunnel song.
Secret, 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 secret tunnel.
So easily the highlight of episode 4 comes with Iroh and Zuko's subplot, and this is some of my favorite stuff in the entire show. First off, love the Earth Kingdom soldier with a personal grudge against Iroh. That is honestly an inspired idea. Him calling Iroh out for his pretty heinous past, and Iroh responding by threatening him. That's good stuff. And our first glimpse into Iroh's more intimidating side. This is cool. Zuko coming in to save him is great too. A great new context to give a classic scene. I dig it a lot. Plus, we have one of my favorite new additions to the series, where we get this flashback of Iroh attending the funeral of his son, Lu Ten. Is that a joke about Lieutenant? Okay, I get it now. The super sad sight of this broken old man who just lost his son, all while the guests are just talking about how his son's demise is now going to be celebrated as a heroic sacrifice for a corrupt nation. And the one person to actually give words of comfort is Zuko. Even at a younger age, Zuko and Iroh have a bond that's undeniable. And the only thing better is seeing Iroh volunteer to join Zuko in banishment, not as his guardian, but as his friend and companion. I love it so much, and it almost completely makes up for the terrible Boomy and Secret Tunnel stuff. So yeah, episode 4 is an episode of extreme highs and lows. I'm very mixed on it. But y'all, episode 5 is a doozy. Episode 5 is titled Spirited Away. Yes, they did steal that title from a Ghibli film, which is a choice. I don't know if it was intentional, but like, who doesn't know what Spirited Away is? This episode is so freaking weird. Well, on my initial watch, I considered it the best of the series at that point, but upon thinking about it, Yeah, no, this is the worst episode by a mile. Unlike the other episodes, which had pretty hefty good subplots to balance out the weaker stuff, mostly with Zuko and Iroh, this episode has nothing that makes up for the atrocious main plot. This episode makes so many baffling choices. It hurts me physically. This is adapting the Spirit Realm stuff in Season 1, fusing it all into one episode. They even bring in some Season 2 characters, and that's a little worrying, but let's start just discussing this thing. So just real quick, I gotta bring up the fact that they super quickly reference a bunch of the filler episodes from Season 1, implying these events actually happened and we just didn't see them. This is cute, I guess. It's really forced in, though. Why do these tavern folk know about any of this? Anyway, this is where we're introduced to June, who serves absolutely no purpose to this show and is a complete waste of time. Basically the same setup. Iroh and Zuko hire her to track down and kidnap Aang. This pays off next episode in the dumbest way. Otherwise, Zuko and Iroh don't accomplish too much in this one, which is a shame because, again, they are the most entertaining and compelling part of this show. So, first and foremost, this is an adaptation of the episode where Aang first goes into the spirit realm. This village is losing its inhabitants mysteriously, and they suspect it's due to the forest spirit Heibai. And what follows is an adventure into the spirit realm where we learn how it works and encounter some wacky spirit characters and ultimately properly meet Avatar Roku for the first time. Of course, that has less impact here as we've already met Kyoshi, but I digress. Also, we don't actually meet Avatar Roku this episode, so that's a thing. Anyway, it's a pretty great two-part episode in the original series. Definitely one of the best of Season 1. In this series, however, the episode takes a hard left turn and becomes more of a character study thing for our main three. As well as Heibai, the original antagonist of the story, has no role outside of a filler cameo fight scene. He literally doesn't appear again after that, okay? We'll talk about the spirit characters shortly. So, this episode has Katara and Sokka get lost in the fog of lost souls, which isn't a thing until Korra, and I actually do like that. I like bringing in Korra lore way before Korra in the timeline. If they ever do a Korra remake, it'll make it all flow pretty nicely. While in the fog, we get to see Sokka and Katara's backstories, and I just want to say, I hinted at this earlier, but this show loves Katara's backstory. It references and shows us brief flashes of it throughout the entire season, so just finally seeing it really doesn't hit as hard as it needs to. Oh no, Mom is dead, that sucks. I hope this means they do adapt the single most underrated episode of the entire series, The Southern Raiders, but I digress.
I just feel like the show didn't give Katara any attention throughout, at all. She always felt so secondary to Sokka, which we already discussed.
The sequence alone is fine, dare I say even good, just kind of flops when you consider how this show treats Katara. Badly. I legitimately only see this mildly working for someone who, already likes Katara and knows her backstory because they watched the original. I really want to hear a new Avatar fan who hasn't watched the original give their take on this show. How does this work for you? I'm genuinely curious. It's not I'm not making fun of you. I want to know. I want to know. As for Sokka's backstory, okay, so they choose to show this after Katara's backstory, and as such, it immediately breaks the tension. The scene is such a failure in every way. Sokka's dad didn't believe in him. Oh no. We just watched your mom get murdered. It's such tonal whiplash to immediately go from Katara's dramatic tragedy to Sokka's pretty mundane quote-unquote trauma. Something about the way this scene is written to it feels so childish, so unimportant. It points for Bato, I guess. He's pretty cool. This scene does nothing for me. Sokka did nothing for me, and this is the emotional core of his character in this show, and it's pretty handily my least favorite part of this whole episode. Maybe I don't know. It's bad.
Sorry, low quality editing me here again, but what you've been seeing in the background for this entire part is just me playing the scene that this is adapting from the original show on loop. This scene is so much more emotional and mature and great, and it delivers virtually, basically the same role in the story, but, in, 30 seconds, it is so much better than this scene in the new show. And also, this wasn't meant to be paired up with Katara's backstory. as Sokka's great trauma. They were on different levels, okay? This bugs me a lot.
Moving on, this episode also brings in way too many spirit characters for our introduction to this place. Like, let's just run through them real quick, okay? We got Heibe. His 3D model looks fantastic, and he was very cool for, like, the minute he was on screen. Yeah, he's not the antagonist of this episode. He's barely a factor. Makes you wonder why they kept the emphasis on all his imagery. The villain of this episode is actually Ko the Face Stealer, which, alright, I like the idea of introducing him somewhere other than the finale. That always struck me as a really odd B-plot in the original series. But why keep Heibe at all at that point? Just replace the Heibe imagery with Ko imagery. I don't know. He also looks great in this series, and I enjoyed him quite a bit, even if he does feel very shoehorned into the plot. I don't know, this is just not natural pacing. Here's where we get weird. Season 2's Owl Boy is here, which is terrifying, because if they don't adapt the library, I'll be furious. That is one of the coolest episodes aesthetically, and I'm real curious to how it would end up looking. Please tell me this is just a fun cameo for foreshadowing, and it's not compensation for us losing his episode. Also, there's this mysterious fox that looks like a Pokemon and talks to Sokka. Ooh! We'll discuss this character later. Anyway, I like all these characters except the fox, who, keep in mind, we will be talking about her later. It was cool seeing them. I just feel like maybe Heibe should have been entirely cut, and they should have saved Owlboy for when they could do it justice. He just kind of feels like such a strange, very shoehorned addition to this episode's story. Really, you only need Ko. With all this spirit stuff, the awkwardly paced flashbacks that create tonal whiplash, and this episode's just kind of a lot, and not in a good way. Like, it's doing way too much, and I could see it alienating a lot of new fans. This is all information that you need to gradually introduce, because when you're trying to balance the introduction of the spirit realm and how it works with a bunch of new spirit characters with the backstories of two of our main characters, with Aang's story we'll get to shortly, it's just a lot. Anyway, let's get to the good parts of this episode, finally. Okay, Ozai and Azula's inclusion this early in the story, entirely justified for this scene. Legit, this is so good. One of my only nitpicks with the original series is that we really only dive deep into Zuko's trauma and only get to Azula in the finale, basically. There's certainly implications, but we don't get to see Azula interact with Ozai much at all, and it always felt like a missed opportunity to me. Because, you know, characterization good for a character that you want to be deeper than just evil, so yeah. But here, we finally get to see that. So, what does Ozai say to her? What is his grand manipulation? Yeah, he praises Zuko. I saw people act like this was a misreading of Ozai's character. He'd never compliment Zuko, but I disagree. Zuko is used here essentially as a tool to motivate Azula, his favorite child, to do better and reach her full potential. It's a pretty clever new side for Ozai, in my opinion. It even gets a bit more expansion later on. I thought it was really neat. I guess I should talk about these two a little more now. I think Ozai's pretty much perfect in this show. He's a little bit less gleefully evil than Mark Hamill's Ozai in the original, but honestly, it just kind of serves to make him scary in a different way. I think he sells the master manipulator side of Ozai, which Hamill really sold like the tyrannical side. Both of them are excellent, obviously, and I'm just really happy with Ozai in this show. That's the overall moral. Azula's... Okay, look, her actress just doesn't fit this character, is what I wanna say, but frankly, I genuinely cannot tell if it's a thing with the actress or the direction, because the script definitely softens her a lot. This is not the psychopath we love to hate in the original series. This is a spoiled princess who wants to be a warlord. Of course, they could always elaborate on this in later seasons and make her a psychopath, but anyway, for now, she just kind of feels like a spoiled princess who wants to be a warlord. And that's an interesting angle. She's not terrible in the role. It just doesn't feel like Azula. And that's on the script. I think the actress is decent, unless she tries to be intimidating, and she just kinda isn't. They do more interesting things with Azula later on, that from a story perspective, I really enjoy the idea of, but again, I just don't buy it from this version of the character so far. But we'll get there once we reach the finale. Anyway, so Aang finds Gyatso? Hey guys, Gyatso's back! The scene is, like, so sweet, like, genuinely really hard to complain about anything here. Would this scene have been improved if we were fed pieces of Gyatso's story throughout the whole season, and we dwelled on how much Aang missed him earlier on? Yes, absolutely. But for what it is, it's really nice seeing Aang and his mentor have this one final moment together. A chance to have closure and say goodbye. And yes, this may cheapen, like, the death of Gyatso a little bit. Like, Aang ran away and missed everything, and that's kind of a major thing. But also, Aang didn't run away in this version. So no, I think this works. I really love the subtlety with Gyatso's acting during this part. He knows this is the last time he and Aang will ever see one another. And he doesn't have the heart to tell him that. It's emotional, it's powerful, I dig it. And now Aang is sent off to meet Avatar Roku and figure out how to save his friends and the townsfolk from Ko the Face Stealer. Do you see why it's so hard to like this episode? This whole side quest is so disjointed and messy. And in this version, like, we have a more pressing time limit to get to the North Pole, so I don't know. It still doesn't really work for me. They just straight up wrote Sokka and Katara out so they didn't have to deal with them. Let's move on to episode 6, which in my opinion is the best one. So we've now moved on to episode 6, which in my opinion is the best one, because it is a direct remake of the best episode of season 1. Episode 6, titled Masks, is the only time during this entire show I felt consistent joy for an entire episode. Okay, most of an episode. Let's get the negatives out of the way first. Okay, so Aang breaking into the temple to talk to Roku is like, it's like watching the original episode at 2 times speed, and I kind of hate it. It feels so fast. There's no room to digest or take in any of the info. Just kind of dumps it all on you, and it's like, oh shoot, there's Roku. The scene is shot so weird, by the way. It feels so, I don't know, it's odd. Anyway, Roku, very different take, but I like him. Him mimicking Kyoshi was really funny. I kind of like that he's more of a goofball, and the performance wasn't bad. Honestly, it took so long to meet him, I was genuinely wondering if they just cut him out. And this leads to, like, my favorite thing ever. Okay. Get this. Get this. Are you ready for this one? Roku stole a statue of, get this, Ko's mother, who I'm pretty sure is a character in the extended lore, but it's also just, it's so hysterically explained here. Roku just exposition dumps this right after his charming introduction. He's explaining stuff that sounded strange to me, and I'm a huge fan who's pretty familiar with the Avatar universe, at least on the TV show side of things. Just the way he says it, the tone of voice, it's all so unnatural and funny to me. I can't explain why. Anyway, Aang leaves and immediately gets kidnapped by June. Oops! So yeah, June, what was the point of this outside of fan service? She kidnaps Aang for Zuko and Iroh, has one scene where they sort of almost connect, and she just leaves. And it's not even like her bringing Aang to Zuko mattered, because guess what? Zhao shows up and kidnaps Aang anyway, right after, and just drags him back to the Fire Nation after he just left. June was a waste of time. I love that this episode starts with Aang entering the Fire Nation, leaving the Fire Nation, then getting taken back to the Fire Nation, then leaving the Fire Nation again. It's just extremely funny to me. Why didn't Zhao just kidnap him when he was in the Fire Nation? June was a waste of time. Anyway, bye forever, June, or at least until we need you to track down Iroh in the series finale. What? Who said that? No spoilers here in this review that already spoiled a lot of things. You should watch this show if you haven't. The original, I mean you could watch the remake too. I don't care. I don't even hate this thing. Just anyway. So this is where things start becoming a pretty direct adaptation of the Blue Spirit, the best episode of season 1 by 4 country miles, and this stuff rules. It's great. I have very little to complain about. Zuko, oh, by the way, yeah, that's Zuko. Zuko sneaking into the prison where Aang is being held is tense, and the way he takes out the guards is cool. And the escape sequence is exhilarating. The action is excellent. The joke about Zhao prematurely writing a victory speech. Zuko and Aang's escape using these stilts. It's so freaking good, because it is nearly verbatim recreating the best episode of the original season 1. And wow, yes, it is a bit funny that my favorite episode of the whole show is the most loyal to a perfect episode of the original series. But frankly, I will take it. It's a breath of fresh air, and I was so thoroughly into it the entire time. I really geeked out when they did the stilt escape. That just feels like the kind of thing they'd cut out of the live action for seeming goofy, but no, they did it. I'm so happy they did it. Anyway, they reveal Zuko's face the same way, and this leads to something I'm a bit more mixed on. So in the original series, there's this very brief scene after Aang saves Zuko from Zhao's archer people. Zuko wakes up in this beautifully lit forest, and Aang's there, making sure he's okay. Aang brings up a friend he had back in his time, a friend from the Fire Nation back before the prejudice and fascism took control. He wonders that if they had known each other back then, maybe they would have been friends. And Zuko tries to hit him with a fire blast, and Aang escapes. It's a perfect scene, and one of my favorites in the whole show. Probably my favorite scene in all of Season 1. And here they did something different. Zuko wakes up to find himself with Aang, and the two have a very different, much longer conversation. Aang tries to relate to Zuko and be kind, show an interest in our boy's art skills. A new detail I actually really liked, by the way, is that Zuko's good at art. I love that. Anyway, Aang explains his trauma to Zuko, and Zuko actually starts to connect. He shows sympathy for the first time, and then Baby whines like he usually does and tries to attack Aang and gets knocked out. The scene's honestly pretty solid. The issue is that right after this, they do a direct remake of the original scene, and now the pacing's off. You were so close to having something great on your own, and you just kinda screwed it up. I've seen some people critique the show for immediately showing Zuko in a more sympathetic light. He was actually an antagonist during Season 1, and a lot of people forget that because he eventually just became the co-lead as the show went on. But I don't know, I like Zuko for those sympathetic elements, and I don't mind getting them sooner. If anything, it'll just make that one thing he does at the end of Season 2 feel even wilder. Anywho, let's talk about this episode's B-plot, because this is also some pretty good stuff. So they stuck Blue Spirit with Zuko's full backstory, and honestly, not a bad mesh. I mean, okay, it does make it really obvious who the Blue Spirit is, but whatever. The backstory basically plays out the same way it does in the original series. Zuko speaks up at this war meeting, he disrespects his father, and has to fight him. And admittedly, I think us seeing the fight is actually less effective. Like, yeah, ouch, that's Zuko's eye you're burning, but also, I don't know, just the, implications, the ambiguity made it hit even harder, for me at least. However, I do think there's one added detail that is brilliant, and it's a decision so clever, I'm honestly shocked it wasn't from the original series. Because Zuko was so adamant about not sacrificing a specific troop of new recruits, those recruits are actually assigned as Zuko's ship crew, meaning the crew who serves him actually had their lives saved by Zuko, and he didn't tell them. That is such a great idea, and it works to make the crew finally show loyalty to Zuko, after they'd been questioning him all season, which is a pretty nice little thorough line. What follows this is a truly excellent scene. Zuko returns to the ship after his failure to capture Aang, and the rest of the crew salutes him, showing him full respect and awaiting orders. It gave me the feels, and I consider this to be the single best moment in the entire show. It's the one time the show fully nailed something without just taking it from the original series. It's so good that I'm pretending it's canon to the original series. I like it that much. Anyway, Aang saves Sokka and Katara from Ko, as well as the villagers. Literally, what was even the point of teasing us with Hebe? Rude. Ah, well, good episode. Like, really, Masks is a good episode. The opening's a bit oddly paced, but man, everything after is great at best, and at worst, just, decent. Great work to the Netflix team. Genuinely, cheers. All right, let's move on to part 1 of the big finale. Episode 7 is titled The North, and as expected, sees our heroes finally arrive at the North Pole. Not to teach Aang waterbending, though. Why would they do that? That's not a factor in this show. That's not a factor at all. Anyway, this episode is adapting the first North Pole episode from the original series, mostly the storyline with Katara training under Master Pakku, and Sokka trying to flirt with the princess. Oh, sorry, only babies watch YouTube. Riz up the princess. That physically hurt me. Just say. Anyway, yeah, this episode's kind of boring, I don't know. It meets the baseline requirements as a passable adaptation of the story. It's fine. I did not hate it. So, just immediately, right off the bat, one of those things that the team behind the show announced in advance is that they were removing Katara's gender issues and gender-related struggles, something I found very dumb. A woman proving herself as worthy and working hard to overcome adversity in a medieval sexist fantasy world is fine, because, medieval sexist fantasy world. It's I don't know, it's actually quite empowering Mulan footage, and beats just being born perfect and never facing any adversity at all. Hey, who put this Mulan footage here? Well, I bring this up because, no, they didn't remove it. Katara's beef with this sexist wad, Master Pakku, is basically the exact same. Pakku's less over-the-top mean and outright sexist. It's more casual, more I'm just, like, being really loyal to tradition. But, like, otherwise, this is literally the exact same story, man. They fight and Katara loses. The only thing they cut out is Pakku being engaged to Gram Gram. Good, that plot point was really stupid anyway. By the way, I forgot to mention that Gram Gram gave Katara a waterbending scroll by sneaking it into her pack off-screen? I like the idea of it being an heirloom rather than them just stumbling upon it at a pawn shop. But like, this is so stupid. Also, the stakes are significantly lower because Aang has no interest in waterbending. In fact, him needing to master all 4 elements to save the world is just like not a factor in this show. They just do not mention it, which is so weird. It's kind of a big deal. It's like the conceit of the show. Aang being the Avatar, master of all 4 elements, feels like it doesn't matter. It feels like more so his power extends to he can connect with some old dead people. Neat. They don't really do a good job of establishing why he's so OP and why he's the only one who can stop Ozai. Speaking of dead people, Karuk is here. That's neat. I like him. He's got a sick costume. He's definitely a more unique avatar. Okay, so like, remember that fox spirit I mentioned earlier? So that's Yue. Yes, Princess Yue. Yes, Moon Girl and Sokka's weakest love interest, Princess Yue. This was clearly an attempt to add some spirituality to her character in advance, so her backstory and sacrifice in the finale, spoilers, feels less like a Deus Ex Machina, which I can appreciate on paper. Execution is everything, and it's such a strange detail that within the show just feels like an excuse to not have Sokka and Yue spend much time getting to know each other. Them making out and being in love in spite of her being betrothed is far more important than character building. And they go over Sokka's backstory again. It still sucks. I feel nothing. In a show where everyone has a tragic backstory, them expecting us to take this barely developed whatever pity party backstory seriously is laughable. Katara's mom died in front of her. Zuko was abused and scarred by his father. Aang lost every single loved one he had, and Sokka's dad was disappointed in him, I guess. Okay. Hi, editing me coming in real quick. I just want to say that it is really telling that out of every single clip in this entire show, the only one I really couldn't find was Sokka's backstory. Like, it left no impact on the fandom. Also worth noting that Sokka and Yue spend less time together before mugging down on one another than Sokka and Suki spent together. At least this romance wasn't as butchered as theirs in spite of that. I never cared about Yue very much, but whatever. She's well acted and a lovely person in this at least, but I don't know. Anyway, we get Zhao doing things too, and I really enjoy all his scenes. Again, Zhao is just so well acted. He is such a delightfully evil main villain for the season. He's the one character I feel is significantly improved from his original counterpart. The scene where he pretends to be upset over Zuko's assassination. Oh, yeah, by the way, he tried to assassinate Zuko earlier. Zuko escaped. Don't worry, he forgot to mention. Anyway, I love the scene where he pretends to be upset. It's so well done. You can tell he's a giant liar, and so can Iroh. And when Zhao brags about his army and his plan to deal with Aang, he's just so smug and proud of himself. I love this goober, honestly. What a fun scene. Later on, Iroh and Zuko meet up. Zuko's in disguise and stuff. The scene's very similar to one in the original series. I like it. It's cute. It's nice that Zuko's alive. Also, when Iroh's explaining Zhao's battle plan to Zuko, he says, he's attacking the fortress head-on, like a bull in heat, which is the single best line in the entire series. Comments. Do you agree? Comments. If you agree, comment the phrase, I'm going to attack that subscribe button head-on, like a bull in heat. I beg you, please, I want every comment on this video to be referencing that line specifically. If I see a single comment that is not that line, I'm going to be furious. Anyway, Pakku and Katara's fight is fine, notably less visually engaging than the original. They make some wacky, funny wind happen and like, oh wow, amazing. Pakku doesn't really feel that above Katara here. Some people might call this intentional or woke or something, because the old master can't be that much better than the woman. I think the effects budget is just low. Anyway, this basically episode 7. I'm so glad Aang won't learn waterbending. What a great decision. And okay, as if Aang not learning waterbending wasn't bad enough, Katara's waterbending storyline in this season is a mess. We barely get any scenes of her just practicing. Something that was a common occurrence in the original series, regardless of whether or not it was super tied to the plot of the episode. In this series, we don't see her practicing at all. It feels like that garbage forced acquisition of the waterbending scroll was supposed to imply that she practices off-screen. That's super unclear, and it feels so lazy. Katara doesn't seem interested in waterbending at all, and it was a constant motivator for her in the original series. It's why she was so upset by Pakku being a sexist who refused. It was her secondary goal under helping Aang. Removing this personal goal seriously damages Katara's desire for independence, which was such a strong aspect of her character in the original. It feels like the writers either have zero interest in her or saw insane Star Wars and Marvel fans reacting to characters like Rey, Bo-Katan, or Captain Marvel being strong women and just decided to cut out any headstrongness the character had. Obviously, I can't say this for certain, but the times would certainly add up. It's likely more a general reaction to how weird people can be about women being headstrong in any media. I've seen more than my fair share of absolutely absurd takes that boil down to women were good at fighting, so is bad. Like Korra, for example. I see so many people complain about Korra's character, and their criticism is always very thinly veiled. She's a woman who's headstrong and tough complaints, and not actual deconstruction of her mostly well-written character. There are issues with Korra's character, and there are issues that you could focus on that aren't that. I could see Korra backlash being an actual motivator here. Or I'm overanalyzing all this and the writers just didn't really care about her character as much as everyone else's. But in my opinion, that's not really better than changing the story to fit the whims of hypothetical sexist fans. Katara is one of your main 4 characters, and just sidelining her feels lazy to me, especially when this character had so much prominence in the original season. Multiple episodes that explored her points of view, her naivete, and yes, her waterbending training. It's just really disappointing as a fan of the show and of this character. We're at the last one, finally! Oh my gosh! So we made it. The big finale, episode 8, titled Legends. This is obviously an adaptation of the season 1 finale, The Siege of the North, and it's decent. I actually think that because we tackled the Ko stuff earlier, cutting it out of the finale is totally fine. It always felt like a weirdly disconnected side plot to me, so I don't mind its absence all too much. Otherwise, yeah, pretty much just a redo of the season 1 finale with a few added and removed elements. For all intents and purposes, it's solid. Dare I say, even good. Well, okay, let's talk about it. So yeah, Fire Nation arrives and starts attacking. Right off the bat, I like that they draw attention to the fact that the Fire Nation is doing exactly what they did to the Airbenders, wiping out an entire culture in their quest for complete control and dominance. So anyway, Momo freaking dies. Like for real. You probably noticed I didn't bring up Momo much throughout the video, and like, why would I? It's Momo. You know his shtick. He shows up, has a cutesy moment, and then he fades into the background, and who was the person on staff who decided to give him a dramatic sacrifice? He saves this person from some debris and gets his tiny body crunched. When I tell you that this is the funniest scene in the entire show, I don't actually mean it, because he was attacking the fortress head-on, like a bull in heat. I had to rewind and watch it a solid 2 more times, because what do you mean you gave Momo a dramatic sacrifice? And they end up using this as a segue to introduce the healing pool with the moon spirit. Come on, could this get any better? Anyway, yeah, they heal Momo. He's fine. Yeah. Okay, so Zhao. I cannot get over the fact that Zhao here is such a genuine improvement over his original character. I wasn't against Zhao's relatively flat personality and non-existent motive in the original. I just found him pretty boring thanks to the performance. This Zhao, though? Gosh, he kills it. He feels like a great main villain for the season, despite the fact he isn't really written any differently. A great performance can really elevate a somewhat flat script, and this is a prime example. His insane plan to kill the moon spirit and cripple all waterbending is so much more effective here, because we've already seen multiple times that this guy is unstable. And while that is also the case in the original series, the almost bored-sounding line delivery kind of hinders it from being as effective as it wants to be. Zhao right here? He is my highest compliment to this entire show. He's kind of awesome, actually. Just how smug he is. He's so genuinely funny while also being super intimidating. And the way he tries to tempt Iroh into being his second in command, I dig it. Highest praise to Zhao, honestly. Good man. Anyway, so there's like panic and stuff in the city. Yeah, it's cool and stuff, I guess. Whatever. Somehow feels notably less catastrophic than in the original series, but whatever. The scene where Katara unites all the women's to protest against Pakku and his sexist belief is so funny to me, because not only did she go out of her way to do this, but hey, isn't this putting more emphasis on those gender issues you said you removed? There's also a couple added scenes with Yue's fiance, and they like make him more sympathetic, and like, okay. Cool. I don't know, Momo's fake out death is the only real thing of note here. A lot of this part is just kind of boring. Anyway, so back to deeper negatives. Azula sucks. It is amazing how they donked up every major female character in this series. Toph, you better watch your back. Anyway, so Azula spends the episode trying to impress Ozai and eventually stands up to him and calls him out, which, okay, I'm not against this idea for, like, later. This episode feels like it's trying way too hard to be the reveal of Azula's true colors, while also ignoring the fact that she's just as screwed up as Zuko is, but doesn't realize it. Azula's a spoiled bat princess who has huge ambition. She wants to conquer, and I love the idea of her being the mastermind behind Zhao's whole rise to power. That's really clever. Zhao telling Zuko that he's just a tool Ozai used to motivate his sister is really good. I love all the ideas behind this, but Azula just is not nearly intimidating enough, nor does she feel nuanced in any way. This does not sell her as this big overarching villain we need to watch out for. The small tease we got of her at the very end of season 1 was genuinely more effective. Obviously, there's still time to fix her character, but man, her standing up to Ozai does not sit right to me. She's not supposed to realize he's been in control of her all along. At least not until way later. At least we finally got Aang's waterbending kaiju in live action, something the M. Night movie was sorely lacking. And it looks cool. The effects are super solid. Hey, I found the effects budget! Really, I don't have any real issues with the climax. Zhao kills the fish, Iroh gets very, very angy, and then Aang goes kaiju. Rawr! My only big gripe here is the music choice. Like, I encourage you to listen to the music during the original scene and compare it to this version. It is so much less impactful here. That's one of my favorite pieces of music in the original series. Zhao's death is pretty good. Zuko's final battle with them is pretty good. This is pretty good. Bummed about the music, but I'll take it. Wipes the floor with the disgrace that is the M. Night disaster. And with the added drama, with Aang potentially losing himself to the kaiju is kind of... He's gonna be fine. It does at least reinforce that Aang is not in control while in the Avatar state, which is something a lot of fans need reminding of, apparently, because they say, actually, Aang says he's never killed anyone, but here's a compilation of him killing people. He wasn't in control. Did you watch the show? Anywho, we get some dialogue setting up season 2. Zuko and Iroh set off for the absolute roller coaster for them that is season 2. We get a tease of Sozin's comet and Ozai's ultimate plan for world domination. Aang didn't learn a single element, and that's it. We're done. We're done. I can go home. I'm finally free. I'm free. You know what? I'm going. Bye. I'm out of here. I did not hate this show. I didn't love it. I barely liked it. But for what it is, yeah, it could have been worse. There's still utterly infuriating casting choices and writing decisions, but there's a level of care here that the M. Night movie just didn't have, and it's worth pointing out. These people are clearly at least somewhat passionate, and they're certainly trying to give us a quality product. I don't think this show is bad. I'm consciously optimistic to see, what the next 2 seasons have to offer. But like, guys, I feel the need to use this video to inform you and encourage you and inform as many people as possible that Avatar Studios is now a thing, and they are cooking. We're getting a 2D animated feature film about Team Avatar, the original Team Avatar, as adults, with Dave Bautista cast as the villain. I'm ecstatic about this, and I literally, every single potential project they mention has me giddy with hype. But as if all that wasn't good enough, this could even lead into a potential Avatar Gen 3, which, oh my gosh, if this actually happens, I promise I will review every single episode as they release. The hypothetical of this thing existing is now my most anticipated TV show of all time, besides Fiona and Cake Season 2, which I am also considering covering episode by episode when that drops. But I know that'll be peak, so yeah. Anyway, let's finally finish this monster of a video. I give Avatar: The Last Airbender, Netflix, Season 1, a 6 out of 10. Like I said, could have been worse.